In February of 1920, the small German city of Holstenwall was petrified by a series of strange murders. Police and official town records are scarce at best, as the town was one of many small German hamlets that were effectively obliterated by the events of the next 2 decades. Yet, the surviving records of the following month paint a truly disturbing picture. 2 main records of the events have been found, both reinforcing and undermining one another. Regardless, it's debatable as to who exactly the Madman of Holstenwall was. On the morning of February 15th, Holstenwall's town clerk was found stabbed to death in his bed. The door had been locked, but the window had been left open, apparently allowing the murderer to climb in. The clerk was reportedly known for being extremely rude and obnoxious at the best of times, and many suggested that the murder was an act of petty revenge by someone who knew him personally. This suggestion, however, was shattered the very next night. Alan Twardowski, a young student who had no known ties to the clerk, was also found stabbed to death in his bed. Again, the window outside seemed to be the only possible method of entrance or exit. By this point, the townspeople had become genuinely frightened. Holstenwall was a fairly small town, and a crime of this magnitude was a rarity. Several boarded up their windows and bought new locks for their doors. In the grim atmosphere, the only bright spot was a carnival that had come to town a few days before, but even there, many speculated that the murderer was a man working there. In fact, Alan's friend, Francis Fayer, went to the police claiming that a fortune-teller at the carnival, a man apparently named Dr. Caligari, had foreseen Francis's death. Caligari's act was quite unusual. In it, he used a form of hypnosis to control another man, a slender somnambulist named Cesare, who dwelt in a long coffin-like cabinet. According to Caligari, Cesare suffered from an extreme form of sleep disorder, in which he was in a permanent state of slumber. Only with Caligari's hypnosis was he able to awaken enough to feed himself, but he was also able to see the future in his dreams, which he would then announce to the waiting audience. Still, there was simply no proof of anything either way, until the very next night. A local small-time criminal, Ludwig Rex, was caught after he attacked an elderly woman in her home. She was unharmed, but Ludwig was pursued and captured by police. He was immediately taken to the police station and questioned. Ludwig confessed to the attempted murder of the woman, but was adamant that he hadn't been responsible for the other 2, claiming he had intended to use them to divert suspicion away from his own crime. No other murder occurred that night. The next night, however, brought everything to a head. At about 1 a.m., a loud struggle was heard in the home of a local woman named Jane Dagover. Cesare was seen by several awakened locals striding out of her home and carrying her away. A mob of furious locals formed and began to pursue the sleepwalker, who dumped Jane on the ground and continued to run. However, after running less than a mile, Cesare collapsed and died on the spot. Fortunately, Jane was merely unconscious and was swiftly awakened. During the ensuing manhunt for Dr. Caligari, he was ultimately discovered to be an identity taken by the reclusive director of the Holstenwall Insane Asylum. His own journal revealed that he had become obsessed with the exploits of an 18th-century mystic named Caligari. This first Caligari used a somnambulist named Cesare to commit a series of gruesome and pointless murders in North Italian towns. When the director got a man with a similar condition into his asylum, he made the fellow his own Cesare and in his own mind became Caligari. The director was carried away by the mob and physically forced into a cell of his own asylum. The official documents salvaged from Holstenwall's archives, citing the death of the town clerk and the other murders, apparently confirm that these events actually transpired. However, the situation is far more complex than it initially appears. A series of documents recovered from the ruins of Holstenwall Asylum cite the events as part of an analysis into the psyche of one of the inmates, a young man named Francis Fayer. According to these documents, Francis was apparently a schizophrenic who suffered delusions involving an elaborate series of events regarding the other inmates as part of his delusions. The records cite the exact events written into the town records as an insight into Francis's psyche, and the last page indicates that the director of the asylum conclusively decided on a treatment plan for Francis after this. But any and all records beyond this point are mysteriously blank, and no other reference to the events has ever been found. So the question remains, what happened in Holstenwall? History is silent, but the records remain. Theories abound as to exactly what they mean, each more bizarre than the last. But for a time, at least, it appears as though the boundary between madness and sanity was very thin indeed, 100 years ago, in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.